Today we are talking about Luxembourg, the place where I decide to come and have a life.
People sometimes come from far away and they really don't know what to expect. And then there is the promise how Luxembourg is presented to you. And then you arrive in Luxembourg and then you find that things aren't quite as straightforward as people said they were going to be.
I would like to tackle each of those step by step for all those people that really want to generate this sense of belonging. Luxembourg is full of opportunity, but what is the reality?
I have expats that have their very first expectations. So what used to be called culture shock, things are not the way they were in my home country.
Some people you see that they are adapted very fast. Some other people are still feeling that they don't belong. How the people can build their own environment here.
It is absolutely essential to make an effort to learn at least one of the local languages.
So please, grab a cup of coffee or tea, get comfortable, and enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Brilliantly Branded podcast.
Sometimes when we decide to arrive to another country, to being abroad and have that adventure, we don't have all the information that we need, accurate information. So sometimes we have a life, we have a career, we have everything organized. So that generates a lot of excitement. But what happened in the moment we arrived to this place? And today we are talking about the place of Luxembourg, the place where I am living, the place where I decide to come and live and have a life. My guest today is a person that has been working in relocation, working in cultural integration. And I have to give a welcome to Denis Niedringhaus. Denis, welcome to the Brilliantly Branded podcast. I'm very happy about this conversation that will give value to all those families, all those women that are all of a sudden end up being relocated in Luxembourg or planning to come to here. So my first question will be, how do you approach that processes? And as a part of your background, if you can give us a little introduction about who you are and what you do.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I think it's an important conversation because people sometimes come from far away and they really don't know what to expect. And then there is the promise, you look at a website and you get some idea of, how Luxembourg is presented to you. And then you arrive in Luxembourg and then you find that, maybe things aren't quite as straightforward as people said they were going to be. And you're left with a daunting task of finding your way and of putting down roots and feeling like, I have a purpose here. So for the past 8 years, I've been in Luxembourg for 8 years. I've been supporting expats on international assignments. Sometimes this is just the single expat. Sometimes it's an expat with a family, and sometimes it's a family coming. And I tell the person accompanying the expat that they're both landing in Luxembourg, but in reality, their daily lives are going to be different. Maybe the partner has a full-time job and he or she is, already in an environment that's fairly stable. Whereas the expat spouse, for example, is just like dropped into a neighborhood. They're not familiar with the schools, with the shops. Language is a huge consideration, which affects to what extent the person is able to integrate and, how smoothly that goes. So a lot of people contact me, ideally before coming to Luxembourg, and they want to get a sense of, how easy is it going to be or what's going to be challenging? And I can give very practical information. But once they get here, they need support.
Yeah.
They need someone to talk to who understands the frustrations of dealing with bureaucracy.
Yeah, this is a very wide topic. It's just you mentioned some of the things, is the language, what are the jobs, where happen with the schools of the kids. And I would like to tackle each of those step by step because exactly one of the things is make this episode as useful as possible for all those people that really want to generate this sense of belonging that for me have been very important since the moment that I decided to come to Luxembourg. So in my case, I have already set up many different things. So one thing is this reality, right? What the people are thinking about the country that they are going to arrive to live. And the other one is the expectations also. So I have heard, and probably you have heard as well, how many people are saying, well, Luxembourg, Luxembourg is full of opportunity, full of rich people going around and doing many things. But what is the reality? So my question is, what are the experiences that you have been had from people when the people just contacting you and said, okay, we are going to Luxembourg? Why they are thinking about Luxembourg?
Usually it's for a job opportunity. A person sees that they have a career opportunity that they wouldn't have if they stayed in their home country. So usually the motivation is, well, this is an opportunity for me to develop my skills, in whatever business they're in. And they may think if they have young children, this is a good opportunity to put them in an international environment, to get some to learn another language and to step into a community. Sometimes I have expats this is their very first expectation. So, they have what used to be called culture shock. It's just a transitional stress. Things are not the way they were in my home country. And, it takes some adjustment there. And sometimes you have people who've gone there their third, fourth, or fifth expatriation. Sometimes you get people around their fourth or fifth expatriation and they've never done an intercultural training. And I think, whoa, how did you manage India or Japan without an intercultural training? Because there, in those countries, the culture will slap you in the face. I mean, the cultural differences are so tangible that you think, I wouldn't step out of my house, without a cultural training just to get a sense of being grounded. Luxembourg is mysterious in the way that you think, well, everyone here speaks English, right? So I can get by on English. And, well, the culture here isn't that important or that present. But that's a mistake to make. But that's a mistake that they make. And in fact, they realize later on, if they don't have some kind of idea of who is who in Luxembourg, because you just can't tell from the language, well, is my colleague speaking Luxembourgish or is that German? Is that French-speaking person a cross-border worker or is that a French-speaking Luxembourger? So English is a kind of Esperanto, but it doesn't give you the clues as to who is who and not only how people work differently, but how they communicate differently.
So that just means that the cultural, let's say, learning about the culture, learning about what is happening around, what are the languages, what are the people that they are going to interact with, is a part of the things that you will advise, well, go and check that first, or how you will start to give in that check. Because I think one of the things is the reality when we are thinking, okay, we are going to this country, we are going to speak English, that this is not the case when you come to Luxembourg. So as my experience living here, you speak different languages based on the environments that you are going. But could you please bring in us to a little bit what are the details, what the people should be getting aware of, especially, for example, the cultural shock, is if you are coming from other countries, how are you going to behave? What are the best practices to behave? Well, I mean, it's many questions, but please, you are the expert here.
And they all come together. So to give you a sense of how frightening or how intimidating Luxembourg can be, I did a training 2 years ago for about 12 Chinese engineers. And they were just dropped into this company and they thought, well, everyone here speaks English and they think like, Anglo-Saxons. And that wasn't the case. And they really needed someone to give them a sense of, well, if you have a problem, go to a French-speaking person faster, even if you don't speak French, because they're a little bit more relationship-based. If you want it solved quickly, go to a German, even though he might be more straightforward in his communication. He's very task-oriented. And I tried to explain, the general differences, what makes a German in terms of transaction, in terms of building relationships, basic communication. What is different about a French person, about a German person, and what makes a Luxembourger? Because most people from around the world, when they hear Luxembourg, they immediately associate it with Germany.
That is a very good point. And I will love if you can actually, it's as this is we are generating value here, how you can define how or what are the difference between the German, Luxembourger, a French, for example. Will you be able to define this here to let the people know what is the difference culturally that they need to be aware of if they arrive to Luxembourg?
Right. Well, a lot of it is going to depend on what neighborhood you choose to live in or what part of Luxembourg. And because there's a housing crisis, people, they have a hard time finding flats. And so last week,
How is that housing? I mean, how you can explain that for people that don't
right,
know,
right,
and they
right.
decide, okay, we are going to Luxembourg, and then we were listening to a podcast, and they were talking about this housing
It's
crisis. What is
probably
that?
one of the biggest issues that expats have to face. You know, they'll be promised a comfortable salary. And then when they start, deducting the high cost of living, the cost of rent, and then the difficulty in finding rent.
How you will define what is happening in Luxembourg in the reality? Because one thing is the expectations. So when the people arrive, they find problems in the housing, as we were talking about. So how would you advise to people to be aware of that? You was talking about probably how they are going to choose the neighborhood, and what is the most important part related with that
Right.
is one question.
Right.
And the other one will be, what is the real situation related with that based on your perception?
Right. It's a complex question, and a lot of it depends on luck, to be very honest with you. Everyone wants to go to certain neighborhoods where there are high percentages of expats, but you need to be lucky getting, applying at the right time of the year, maybe when a couple has just left, or maybe having some kind of in with the landlord who can make a very arbitrary decision as to who he or she wants to have as tenants. So, when people say, well, for this reason, I want to be close to the tram or I want to be close to an international school, they'll say, oh, I want to be in Limpertsberg, for example, which is the neighborhood with the highest percentage of expats. But that's where everyone wants to live, right? So,
Not my personal case, but I respect that.
right. But you have to understand that, everyone wants to live in a very small area.
Yeah,
So there's
that's
a
true.
if you come at the wrong time of year, you would be very lucky to find a suitable flat in certain neighborhoods. If people say, oh, I want a garden for my children or I have a pet, well, then you're probably going to have to move further away from the city of Luxembourg where it's less difficult to find accommodations. But then the further away you move from Luxembourg City, if you're an expat spouse, you're thinking, whoa, okay, you're not going to have everything at hand. You're not going to have you'll have to take a tram, and networking is going to be a little bit more challenging than if everything is just outside your door, right?
Okay,
So
when is the best time to do that process? Because you mentioned if you have this, you do that process in the best time of the year. So which one is the best time of the year to do that?
in my experience, late spring is a good time to come, or mid-autumn is a good time to come. I would avoid coming, for example, in July or August. A lot of real estate agencies are closed or are closing down. They're already in vacation mode.
Okay.
And then there are months where there's just a lot of people coming in, like June or September. And so I would suggest coming in an off month
Okay.
when there's a higher probability of getting
But actually, with how many times someone that was delegated to go to live in Luxembourg, with how long in advance they need to start to prepare to looking for an apartment? They should be having the apartment before arriving here, or how that works? What is your
Yeah.
recommendation?
A lot of different companies have different things in place in terms of support. Someone coming with a large multinational company, there might be someone in the company that says, okay, well, I'll help you find an apartment, and you can come a month or two early before you actually come with your family and arrive with the furniture. And then you can take a look at neighborhoods and I'll try and find something for you. Some companies have that in place. Others, people, they'll spend a month in a rental apartment, a business hotel, and they'll be given 5 or 6 weeks to find a flat on their own. Not easy.
Wow, this is the average that you can take to find the flat that you want, or the availability. How that works here in Luxembourg?
It's very arbitrary, because some people get lucky and they're at the right place at the right time, and other people, they have a comfortable salary and they're not too demanding on the neighborhood, but they can spend weeks, if not months, finding a place to stay.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine. It have been part of our process as well, to looking for the place to apply. You mentioned something that is the cultural, let's say, shock that happened in Luxembourg that the people needs to be aware of. What are the things?
I'm not sure if anything is actually going to to shock people because it's very cosmopolitan, and there is such a extensive expat community here that you can always find some kind of support if you have the habit from your culture of simply asking for help. So, like, a number one piece of advice for someone coming here is that do not be afraid to ask for help, because if I can say one strong thing in favor of Luxembourg is that these people are very helpful.
Mhm.
They want the talent. They want people to come from all over the world, and they try to make things as easy as possible. And people usually go the extra mile to help if you ask for it. So even people who speak good English or French, I'll say to them, if you need help, if you have a question, if you're looking for an English-speaking veterinarian, for example, well, then there are Facebook groups, expats in Luxembourg. Go online and ask for help. I was working with a South African company, and the husband had a job, and the wife said, oh, wow, I work in human resources, but I don't speak a word of French. Do you think I'm going to be able to find a job in Luxembourg? And I said, well, join expats in Luxembourg group, and ask some questions. And this woman struck up a conversation, not with the woman who gave her a job, but a woman said, hey, let's have coffee. And over coffee, the woman said, I know someone in X company. They don't need to have us French speaking. And, just by going out, by meeting people, socializing, joining a chamber of commerce, not even joining a chamber of commerce, attending a chamber of commerce meeting.
Yeah, do you know that I met my husband in the Chamber of Commerce? So it's just funny that you say that.
Is that a warning? No.
Well, no. I think, Dennis, and I really like the point that we arrive, because one thing is getting into the country. Okay, this is one thing, let's say, check. But what happens when we are here, living here? Some people, you see that they are adapted very fast. Some other people are still feeling that they don't belong. And when I am doing business with other people and having networking events and these things, a lot of people are telling me I'm feeling that I don't belong in Luxembourg. So that will be part of my questions to you, because how the people can generate this sense of belonging by knowing the rules, knowing how to play, without going into the details yet.
Sure.
But we have here two worlds. That is the people that are already coming with a job, a position, everything. But it's the family. What happened with the spouses, for example?
Exactly.
What happened with they wanted to belong and build their own environment here. So
Right.
what would you be advising to them right now?
That's a wonderful question and important to answer. And it might not be what you hear from most other English speakers, but I think it is absolutely essential to make an effort to learn at least one of the local languages. You don't need to master it, but you need to make an effort. If you want to get a sense that I've stepped out of my expat bubble and I'm exchanging with the locals, interfacing with the locals beyond just the simple, short, transactional kinds of conversations, you need to learn some French. I would actually put French as the number one language because, quite honestly, 3 or 4 years later, if you leave Luxembourg, you're probably not going to use your Luxembourgish again. Whereas French, there are many parts of Africa or Asia where French will come in handy. It's actually an easier language to learn for native English speakers than Luxembourgish.
Yeah, because for people that don't know what are the official languages in Luxembourg, well, a lot of people is asking me, what are the languages that you are speaking in Luxembourg?
There are 4 that, you could hear easily on a daily basis. And what's curious about Luxembourg is that you can hear natives slip in and out of a language. So they might start a sentence in Luxembourgish and end it in French, or say something in French and the next question will be in English. Or people have this agility. Most people, I would say at least, are trilingual in Luxembourg.
Okay, yeah, that is important. Languages is a very important tip for people to know how to deal with that.
But I don't want to be categorical. I would not say to an expat family coming over, oh, you should learn French. Because if the family decides that they want to put their children in a local school, their children will be hearing Luxembourgish. So do they want their children learning a language that they themselves can't speak? So it might be a good idea, especially if you're outside of Luxembourg City, to learn Luxembourgish. By the way, there is an online website where you can learn Luxembourgish for free.
Okay, we can put that link. And the other thing that I found very important is what are the activities that you are doing in your daily life, because it's beyond the work. There is a relationships that you need to build. There is a network that you need to build. So what you will be advising people to start building on that in order to get it what they want, the opportunities that they heard that will have Luxembourg for them.
Right. For expat women, there's the network, and that's a very important organization that's been around for a number of years, and they have monthly meetings.
Yeah, I
And
can recommend them. I was part of that, and they are
and
amazing.
there's a wonderful group of people. And so you meet other expat women. They share ideas, energies, and they get some sort of emotional kind of support for the journey, because let's not underestimate the isolation. The isolation at times is just paralyzing. I see this because I work with couples over like a 3 to 6 month period, and you can see it. They're not ready for what they didn't realize the challenge that this was going to be. Because on paper, everything looks simple, everything is streamlined, and then suddenly husband goes off to work, kids go off to school. And, someone who doesn't have a good network, it's like, oh, well, how am I going to put structure into my day? Oh my God, what am I going to do? In my community, I don't speak French. And so, the feeling of isolation, I came to Luxembourg in 1 year before COVID. And COVID, everyone knows what lockdown was and what that isolation was like. But for some couples, it was just devastating. I had a Chinese woman who just wanted to cry. And I said, you know what? I understand the situation. Let me hold space for you, because I can't give you any answers right now. I can't. There's no quick solution. You're going to go with your child through a really rough period. Holding space for people, just being present for people, even if you can't. Here's the address. Here's what you need. Here's the answer, or here's the information.
Correct.
I can't do that. No one can do that right now, but I can be present and I can listen. And that's how coaching comes into this. People listening to themselves talk about a difficult situation, they themselves start to get a little bit more of a perspective on it and feel a little bit more resilience simply by telling another person about it.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just there's a side of you that just needs to be able to listen and hear people out.
You was mentioning actually at the beginning the fact that the people are sometimes asking for help and asking for coaching in this case is so important. I am included in this group because I'm a coach also, but always to support, always to have this voice. If someone is calling you and say, well, let's go for a coffee, is this something I always say yes, because for me it's important, as you said. But in the process of wanted to belong in the business world, and I told you that I wanted to tackle this topic because that had been my story. So when I came to Luxembourg, I was part of the corporate world, and then I decided to do in business and start my life as an entrepreneur. But we were talking about how you can establish your business in another episode. But once you have your business, how you can really be part of playing in the Luxembourg market in order to offer your services. There is some things that you can share with us in order to know how to really be part of that world.
My successful strategy has been lunch. If a person is too busy to have lunch, you have coffee. Sometimes it will take you 2 or 3 coffees to actually make an inroad. But there is something I'd like to say about Luxembourg, and I think it's a reality that a lot of people don't talk about. It is a very difficult market. If you're not a Luxembourger, you are, to use a metaphor, you're fishing in a very small pond, because you have a country and a culture which draws a lot of entrepreneurs. A lot of the big companies that hire freelancers or coaches, they have their people in place. And if they have someone who speaks Luxembourgish and you don't, they're at an advantage. So I think it's important for people to realize, are they really offering a service that doesn't already exist in Luxembourg? And Luxembourgers, let's talk about something geographical or demographical that's important. Luxembourgers in Luxembourg City are the minority. There was a study that came out several years ago that said of all the people working in downtown Luxembourg City, almost 70% of them do not identify as Luxembourgers. So expats come to Luxembourg City and they say, well, why learn Luxembourgish? I never hear Luxembourgish. There's not even a native Luxembourger in my company. Why bother? So the reason I'm mentioning that statistic is that when you consider the fact that in the city of Luxembourg, that Luxembourgers are the minority, then you have to understand why they stand together. A community stands together for very understandable reasons. That's going to seem like a firewall to people who come from the outside. I mean, it's probably the most politically incorrect sentence in the city of Luxembourg, but there's that restaurant that says, I don't speak Luxembourgish well, but it basically says, we want to remain as we are. And this is a country and a culture and a language which statistically is threatened by the outside world. So even historically, Luxembourg has always been a country that has been annexed or invaded or traded by its neighbors. So it seems to be absolutely natural that in their DNA, these people have this kind of need to welcome foreigners and this deep-seated sort of, but we also need to keep our distance from them. And I'm saying this because as an entrepreneur, you need to be aware of the hurdle is cultural and you're not going to bridge it that easily.
Do you think that will actually make people afraid to come to Luxembourg and build their own ventures and their own companies? Because this is part of the things that probably have been causing on me a lot of concern, in the sense that how we are going to make this grow. For example, the startups world and all the entrepreneurs. How will you really express that in order to don't make people afraid? Because actually what we want is really attracted more people,
I don't
right?
want to make people afraid, but forewarned is forearmed. So it's better to come with an idea of what the challenges are than to find out once you get there, this isn't going to be as easy as I expected it to be.
Those are the challenges, but what would you advise for people to say, well, is I can still be part of that. I can still, this is a challenge, but I'm going to face it and I'm going to tackle that and I'm going to succeed, because otherwise people will say, well, even I am not going to try. Not my personal case. I'm trying every day.
Right. Yeah, we all are. Yeah, and I think, in the world economy today and with and with AI threatening people's jobs, and there's a lot of insecurity, even for people who are employed, right? And so these are challenging times, even for fully employed people or for freelancers or for entrepreneurs. But what I want to say about Luxembourg is that it wants people to come, and it is entrepreneurial friendly. So they've streamlined a lot of processes, and people here are extremely helpful. So I've had really people go out of their way to help me, because I came to Luxembourg. I didn't have any experience in running a business. People said, "No, okay, Dennis, you need to do this, and here's the process." Here's a funny story. The day I started my company in February of 2019, I was told I had to register the company. So I went down to the House of Training. I made an appointment, and the man said, "Okay, do you have your fee to register the company?" He says, "Oh, yes, I do." And there we go. And he said, "Okay, well, where are your statutes?" Sorry?
What is that?
Where are my statutes? He goes, I mean, you have to have statutes to start a company. Oh, I do? Who told me that? I mean, that wasn't on any website. I didn't have that information. And the gentleman said, okay, he looks at his watch and said, well, I've got just kind of a shell. And if we just take about half an hour, we can just do your statutes here. And I thought, I can come back, in a couple of weeks. No, we'll just get it done now. And I was like, I really appreciate you're taking the extra time. It's not your job to do that for. No problem. People here are very task oriented, and they will help you, go through the process. The other thing that I hear a lot about, because I've done this living and working in Luxembourg training, I guess about 300 times. And you hear people's impressions of like, how are you finding the locals,
Yeah.
here? And one thing that I find is that they're very helpful people. Here again, I want to be honest. They're not the most open people in the world. They're not the most friendly people in the world. They're very task oriented. So even people who are Luxembourgers, they understand that in Luxembourg, people place a high priority on privacy. And so it's not like in American culture, oh, you've come over with the kids, mi casa es su casa, and people come in and out of people's homes much more easily in some parts of the United States as well. In Luxembourg, my home is my castle. Like, this is the country of castles. And people can be friendly, but they also need to keep a certain space to maintain their privacy. And that's important to say because you don't want to judge people as cold or as unfriendly. That's the culture here.
It's important to understand the culture and how they behave. What you can say to the people that are ready to do business, but in the moment to, okay, I have my products, I have my services, how can I approach the locals if they are potential to consume my products or my services?
That's an excellent question. So what I'd like to say to that is have a realistic expectation of how long something is going to take. So I told you that I hear a lot of impressions of what people say about Luxembourgers and that people are very helpful. Another adjective that comes out a lot is slow. Luxembourg is not a country where things happen quickly. Things are very processed, driven kind of country, right? And so if they say, well, it's going to take X number of weeks to get your authorization, you think, oh boy, they can't, the FedEx this, it's not. No, it's going to take a certain number of weeks and they're reliable, but they don't respond quickly.
You are talking about the business world, not the administrative part.
Both, really. It's just how the country runs. If you want to make a bad impression with a Luxembourger, it's like, can you get this to me by Friday? And maybe be a little bit too direct and too informal, because this is also a culture that prizes formality. People are comfortable with protocol, with procedure, with titles.
Okay, yeah. And if we come to a country that have that as a part of the culture, we need to be respectful with that and follow the rules if we really want to belong, right?
Right, but you can go easy. You can go into judgment mode. Oh, they're such snobs. They're so arrogant. They're so unfriendly. You can. But then you have to ask the person, okay, well, what in your culture is your definition of friendly? What does polite mean in your culture?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's variable.
Do you know about, for example, workshops or things that the people can do in order to learn more about the Luxembourgish culture?
That's really an excellent question. And I wish I could say I did. I do not. So I work for a number of intermediaries, and they find my clients for me who are working in Luxembourgish companies. To my mind, the country of Luxembourg does not actively promote workshops on understanding Luxembourgish culture. It's interesting. In a way, people say, we're so multicultural here, there's no need. And it's this very curious kind of paradox, is that either people say, cultural training, it's irrelevant. Or people say it's the cultural differences are so insurmountable, there's no point in even trying. So you'll never speak Luxembourgish like a Luxembourger. So why bother? And I say there needs to be a middle ground. Culture needs to be taken into consideration. It's not mission impossible to understand the local language, to make friends here if you invest the time. But it's not going to be, okay, I've been here for 3 months and I've already got my first contract. It just doesn't happen.
I have been there many times, is we have our companies, our businesses, and sometimes difficult to really get it into the business, because all of a sudden you don't know the rules. All of a sudden you realize that the business was given to another company that is from Luxembourg, and this is a reality. I mean, this is not
Absolutely.
something like
Absolutely.
it's not happening. I mean, we are speaking here things that are very real, but I think that it's important to get it to know the culture, how that works, and all the things that you just said, Dennis, are very key. I don't know if you wanted to add something else. We have been talking about the business world, but I always wanted to support more the women, all these spouses that arrive alone, that wanted to belong. You already said, well, go and try to connect, but another easy way to connect based on your experience for those women, what will be?
So we talked about not learning to ask for help face-to-face or online, because 9 times out of 10, people will find a piece of the information or an address or another contact person that will move you forward. Another important piece of advice for a woman coming to Luxembourg alone is that do not neglect your self-care. Do not neglect your physical health, because that is going to affect your energy, your
Self-esteem.
drive, your self-esteem, your self-confidence. You've got to take care of yourself. And I've seen, it's sad to say, but it's also reality, I've seen expat couples crack. And it's not fun to watch. Husband has a very heavy workload, doesn't spend enough time home with the family, with the kids. Wife is feeling just disoriented, lonely, isolated, doesn't speak the language. It's hard to network actively when you've got to pick up the kids from the nursery. There are daily life demands, and what I want to say to companies is that this kind of transition is extremely stressful, and you need to support people, especially people that come with families. It is tremendously challenging. I remember speaking to a South African woman. I said, Virginia, we haven't spoken in over a month. How's it going? In one word, Dennis, chaos. My life has just been absolute chaos. I haven't had even half a day to, it's like she needs to talk. And I'm ready to hear that. But I don't think that companies here are. They're investing a lot of resources in bringing people over, and then, okay, found you a flat, fend for yourself. They don't have the wherewithal to fend for themselves. They need the support.
Are you working with those companies that are already creating those environments to make the spouses feel better, or really is not something that is already in place in companies here in Luxembourg?
It's really hit and miss. There are some companies that have understood that, and they actively train people coming from Singapore, from South Africa. They're going to have, 6 to 12 hours of cultural training, which is also support.
Cultural training.
I mean, I could find a website or give them a list of, useful websites or applications for their telephone. And as far as information is concerned, you could put that together in a nice little package, but that doesn't solve people's problems.
Yeah. I just wanted to add a little bit about what you said about don't neglect it yourself in the way that is very important, the attitude that you have in front of the situation that you are living. Because one thing is, I am arriving in a country, I don't know anything, I don't want to do anything, but it's what is in you, in your attitude, personal attitude, how you build up your self-confidence by deciding to do something for yourself. It's a strong message here for women, and thank you, Dennis, because it's already a lot of value that you have been delivering. People can go on contacting you. We are going to share your information in the episode, and thank you for sharing the things based on your experience. I don't know if you wanted to say something else.
Yes, well, gratitude. I think it's a very important humility and gratitude, no matter who you are, where you are, is a real strength that we need to leverage. So I'm grateful to Luxembourg. They let me create my company. I'm grateful to a handful of Luxembourgers who have given me opportunities that I would not have had in France. So I wanted to give you very objective information because I think I owe that to your listeners. I don't want to paint a rosy picture and then have people say, well, it isn't like this at all. I think it's better to come with a good idea of where this country is, where their values are, what their history has been. And then you can have realistic expectations about the challenges of starting a business and finding a place in a community and beginning to integrate the country.
Yeah, that sounds very good. And just to wrap up, I'm going to do to you the last question.
Okay.
And it's, if you could define in one word, what could be the seed for a better world, what that word would be?
Humility. To realize that you are not the center of the world, and the world works in a system, and you're just a part of the system. And you need to set your ego aside sometimes and, with curiosity, listen to other people's lives, their challenges, their pains, and have the openness and the humility to say, even if this experience isn't easy, I'm lucky to have it because I'm learning.
Great. That is fantastic. Denis, thank you very much for being here in the Really Grounded podcast.
Okay.
Thank you. Your story is your brand, and your brand is a seed for a better world. Every conversation you heard today came from someone who showed up to share honestly and trusted that their experience could help someone else. That someone is probably you. Now it is your turn to pass it on. Please share this episode with one woman who needs it. Explore the playlist and find the conversation that is picked for her moment. Because the right story, shared at the right time, changes everything. And every time this community grows, it reaches farther than you can imagine. The proceeds from our brilliantly branded live events go directly to children's education through Seeds for a Better World, the association we founded so that impact never stops. So please explore the playlist, and if you know a voice that deserves to be heard here, please send them my way. Until the next episode, ciao ciao!